I'm going to go down here to the console, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit, clear this thing. And we're looking for the element main with the ID main. So there's 3 different ways. We looked at one way in class yesterday, and that was essentially creating, okay. So here's the deal. In the future, make sure only people who come on time will be able to record the session, because I can only add you when you're here. If you're not here when I go through the list of participants, I won't be able to add you to allow you to record. So if you're not in at when I start the lecture, you won't be able to record. So that might be the deal. I'll see if I can fix that, but so everyone just has default recording permissions. Const main. So we're looking for the ID main. Const main equals. So I'm going to set this to a variable. So we're going to say document dot. We're looking for 3 different ways of getting the element with the ID main. So the first way and most obvious way is get element by ID. And you can see here it actually comes up. There's a lot of things that will come up. Okay, so we're going to go get element by ID, document dot get element by ID, and we're going to pass it the string with the ID main. And obviously that returns undefined because we're setting a variable. Okay, if I just used document.getElementById by ID without setting the variable, assigning the variable, okay, then it would return that element. But because I'm not doing that, because I'm assigning the variable, it's actually in the variable. Okay, so we have that in the variable. So I have that element inside the variable. You can actually open it up and dig through it. Okay, just in the browser. Remember, this is a browser representation of an element object. Okay, so that's one way. That's way number 1. Way number 2, there's more than 2 ways, but there's more than 3 ways, but I just wanted you to take a look at a couple. So another way is to use query selector. Okay, query selector will allow us to use essentially CSS selectors to find a specific element. And they're pretty cool because you can be very specific, just like you can in CSS. You can be very specific with your CSS selectors. So we're looking at query selector main here. This won't find it though, because if we're using our query selectors, we need to be specific about what we're looking for. CSS selectors, right? So in front of main here, we're missing a little something, right? And again, we're looking for something with the ID main. So IDs are in CSS using the pound or the hashtag. Okay, and if we don't want to save that, and we'll run that, and of course. Okay, so I already have this variable defined, so I'm not going to redefine it again. We'll just look at a couple of other ways. Query selector ID main, and we get the exact same element. Okay. Something really cool about this last way, like I said, is we can be super specific. We can scope these by saying like body, right? So we're looking for the element with the ID main inside of body. Right, so we can go very specific, just like we can in our CSS. And then the third way, or a third way, is we can. Let's take a look here. What kind of third way do we have? We can walk there using children, get child of. We can query selector all. Okay. And again, we can say hashtag main. Query selector all, so remember the difference between query selector and query selector all is query selector will give you the first element on the page that it finds. So if you do ask for something on the page with a class and there's multiple items on that page that have that matching class, it will only grab the first one for you. So that can be both a benefit and a drawback. As long as you know that about query selector, that's the important thing. So if you only want one element or the first element on the page with that class, that's perfect. However, query selector all, you use it much in the same manner as query selector. However, you get a list of elements, okay? You'll get a node list back, okay? Now, since we only were able to find one element, it's still a node list, and I cannot work directly on this node list for a lot of the things that we're looking for. So we normally would have to take the first element or like the specific element in question. So the element at index 0, which is this, the home page, which is actually the element, okay? The HTML element. Any questions on this one? No? No, wait, oh, I gotta go to the chat. Manage participants, where's chat? There it is, chat. Okay. Okay, so you can unmute yourself. It's just easier. You should.
Oh yeah, I was trying to ask so we can add a space before our query selector to choose its parents, right?
Yes. Yeah, so you can add a space before your query selector. So as I have here where I'm doing document.body.main, if I were to inspect this HTML a little bit closer, which I will actually right now, I'll inspect this HTML a little bit closer. Let's see, where's main here? Oh, this website is horrible. And we can see main is actually, here's the element main, and we can see main is actually inside something called page with a div with two classes, page and index. So if I really wanted to be more specific, I can say both for query selector all, I can say dot page dot index, right? So this is finding the element with both the classes page and index, and then that space means go inside of that element and look for the one with the ID main. This is a traditional CSS selector, right? And if I use that, and this applies both to query selector all as well as query selector. Okay, so when I take that, I'm getting the same element back. So in this case, nothing super special, but it works really well when you want to target one specific element and you may not be able to in another fashion.
Sorry, what does the dots do?
These dots?
Yeah, I don't.
So we're going to have to take a little trip back in time to our CSS class. The dots represent classes.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Right? So we're really dealing with like CSS selectors here. The dots represent classes. The fact that they're tied together with no space means that the element has both of those classes on it, and then the space means now go inside of this element, look for a child of the page index element, and that child needs to have the ID main. That's essentially what it means.
Yeah, gotcha. Thanks.
Okay, cool. Saria. Sorry.
There's someone, I'm working in the living room. Can you hear me?
Yes, yep.
And I'm working in the living room, and I cannot work in my room, and it's kind of loud in here, so I'm not gonna unmute if that's okay. I asked my question in the chat if.
Okay, sure. You can remute. Connected to Yushin's question. When you say query selector looks for the element through CSS, does it need we need the HTML to be connected to a link .css? No, 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 no. By the way, okay, yeah, 5-year-old boy running around. Gotcha. Okay. No, so yeah, so if there's no CSS ID on main, that won't work. Harold, you're correct. If there's no if there's no ID, so we have to get, so connected to both Saria and Harold's question. So the CSS doesn't actually play a role on it. I'm just referring back to the method of selecting elements that we use for CSS. So regardless of whether or not we have CSS page, like a .css connected to this page, does not play a role in this. It's just we learned these types of selectors when we were studying CSS. That's really all it is. With respect to Harold's question, so if there's no CSS ID on main, that won't work. Yes, you're right, it won't. However, we have to train ourselves to think about classes and ID, not as CSS, specific for CSS. Actually, and I had mentioned this before when we were in CSS, and I'm glad that we're coming around to this. ID is really not for CSS. ID really is for, the ID attribute is really for JavaScript. It's to make these selectors easier. So I use classes almost exclusively for CSS. And then I use ID when I want to target specific elements in JavaScript. I also use the concept of classes as well for JavaScript. But again, I don't really use the concept of ID for CSS. ID, I reserve exclusively for JavaScript. But CSS, classes and IDs are for both. They're for both CSS and JavaScript. They're not tied to one or the other. Any other questions before I move on? Okay, let's keep going. I'm muting you all again. All right, question number 2. Question number 2. Now we're going to use this variable that we just picked up. Oh, I got to move all this stuff over here. I need a bigger screen. This should get me another screen here. Use this variable to limit the scope of your next selector. This means instead of starting your selector with document, you should start it with variable name. Okay, you define in part A. So we found main, we assigned it to a variable, okay? And now we're going to use that to scope our next selector. This will reduce the amount of the document that JavaScript needs to search through and will only look for the element within the block of that HTML that we found. So our next selector is only going to search through main. It's not going to search through the entire document. At least that's our plan. Using the HTML elements you found in part A scope as the scope, go searching for another element with the ID featured slider. One thing to note, the method getElementById won't work here. Explain why and use an alternative option. The why on this is, again, if you go back to the reading, getElementById, put this over here, getElementById only works on document. So getElementById, and I believe it's called featured, just see here, featured slider. And I didn't, oh, hashtag. Okay, so there is an element called featured slider on the page with the ID featured slider. However, I cannot get that when I'm asking you to do it through this variable. So let me just refresh this. So we have a variable main, okay? Main represents that main element, right? That div with the ID main. So if we say main.getElementById, featured slider, you'll quickly see that big fat error message, right? Because get element by ID is not a method on main. It only exists on document. Sorry, it's not main. Main is just a variable I created, but main is an element, okay? Main represents an element, and get element by ID does not exist on elements, okay? It only exists on the document object itself. And so alternatives are main. We can use get elements by class name. However, featured slider is an ID, so class name won't work. So instead, again, and I mentioned this yesterday, query selector is probably the most commonly used selector for the most part. We're going to use this one very, very often. There's a couple of instances where we're not, there's some instances where we're not going to use it. And hopefully I'll clarify some of those instances today of what the benefits of get elements by class name versus query selector are all, because they seem like they do very similar things. And we'll look at a couple of differences today, though why we might want one. Okay, we're going to get hashtag featured slider. Okay, and hashtag featured slider because we need to include that hashtag again because we want to specifically target the element with the ID featured slider. Okay, and we use, and we're scoping it here. Again, look at this. We're changing how we're doing it. We're targeting it through main. So if it's not in this block, this main is an element that contains other elements. If it's not in this block, then it's not going to be found. If it was somewhere else on the page, but not within this element, if it wasn't a descendant of this element, it wouldn't be found. And that's okay, right? As long as we know what we're looking for. And again, a lot of these are simply for practice, just to get you familiar with some of the methods of navigating a page, and not necessarily something that I would ask you on a quiz. Well, we don't do quizzes, or an exam or something like that, okay? How you go about getting your stuff is really your business. And you can see we end up with the featured slider right here. Any questions on this one? You could just type them into chat. Or if you need to be unmuted, I'd be more than happy to do that. So far, how is everything going? Can everyone hear me okay? Can everyone see my screen okay? Am I going too fast? Am I going too slow? A little bit new. If anyone has any problems with anything, just feel free to let me know in chat. Correct. Get element. So the question is by Ray, get element by ID only works on document. Yeah. So I can only use it if I have document dot in front of it. That's the only time I can use get element by ID. So it works on the entire page. Yeah. And query selector works either on document dot query selector, or scoped by element, main.query selector. So any element that you have, however you got that element is irrelevant, right? Whether you got that element from get element by ID, or you found that element through a query selector, or you're using children, right? Like, it doesn't matter how you got the element. As long as you have an element, you can use query selector on it. Any other questions? Yeah, if you want to use query selector for a class, you'd have to use dot. Yeah, yeah. In our case, we've only been using hashtags so far. But if we wanted to find, and we can do that right now, right? We can do main.query selector, and we can see our div here with featured slider also has the class featured slider, right? It has the ID, our element has the ID featured slider. It also has the class featured slider. So I can say dot featured slider, okay? And of course I will get that one, right? Because query selector, again, only finds one. Here's the interesting thing. Banners, I suspect, is probably a class that many things have. So if I type in banners, I may not get this featured slider. So dot banners, let's see which one I get. That looks like the one. Yeah, so I was a little bit wrong, but I'm guessing that there's more banners out here. There is only one. Huh, interesting. One element in this node list. So you tested both and they did the same. Yes. So you test, no, it's not weird. It's expected, okay? The reasoning is because this element, so Yushin saying, I tested both with hashtag and dot and I got the same result. And the answer is yeah, of course, because they both have the class featured slider and the ID featured slider. Yeah, no, the ID, remember, when we're talking about classes, classes are split on spaces. So when an element has classes with a space in between, those are two separate classes, which is why in CSS, or sorry, in HTML, we use dashes to represent spaces. This featured slider, this camel casing, this is really a JavaScript thing. We don't usually do that in HTML. We should be doing, this should be dash in reality, okay? But I mean, this is the MITT page, so what do we expect, right? That was a shot at MITT. Okay, great questions, guys. We roll, okay? Q2. So using query selector, find global nav list and use get element by class name to find the query selector to find the global nav list and use get elements by class name to find the global nav list. Compare the size, how many elements of these two values we found. Okay, so we're essentially testing the difference between query selector and get elements by class name. Now, I clearly forgot to indicate that global nav list is a class. However, I hope that you can infer that by the fact that I'm asking you to get it by class name. So let's try that. Okay, we'll just clear this and we'll query selector. So we'll say const query selector equals document dot query selector. And it is global nav list. Okay. And we use that, we put the dot in there because I'm assuming it's a class. And we type in QS to take a look. And sure it is. We get our singular element. Okay. And then I'm going to say get elements by class name, const, CN for class name. I'm just assigning some variables here. Document dot get elements by class name. And again, just like get element by ID, we don't need to include the dot because it knows we're looking for it by a class. Query selector, because query selector is so flexible, it needs more direction. Because get elements by class name and get elements by ID is not flexible, we don't need to indicate anything else, right? It's only looking for classes. And we look at CN, and we get a group of two elements here. Over here in this QS variable in the query selector, we just got this one element. And over here, we got 2. So the question is, why? Why are we getting a collection over here and a singular element over here? And again, the answer is compare the sizes, use console.logtail, the one that is largest, and let's explain why. So why are they different? Why is this one larger and this one smaller? It's getting elements, correct, Hansmander? Yeah, so it's getting elements, not elements, right? Query selector finds the first one, and actually you can see it pull up that first one, right? Global nav list dot group, okay? And that's this one. This one has another class on it, pseudo global nav, and that's not the one that we're getting, right? So it actually went to go get this one at the top over here. So big difference. Really important that we understand that. Get elements by class name versus query selector. Okay, get elements by class name returns a collection. Again, I'm going to continue to stress that, and I can't stress that enough, okay? Because this is, again, super common mistake. You'll make it. I promise you will. Everyone does. Okay. Any questions on that one? Pretty straightforward, I think. So if we use, yeah, so you can use, so the question is, if I'm using get elements by class name, okay, can we just put a index on the end and get the first element? Yes. Now they're doing the same thing. This is uncommon. In all honesty, this I might use this as demonstration to say, hey, look, it's a list, a collection, an array-like collection, and I'm grabbing the first element from it at index 0. But in reality, this is not the type of expression you would typically use. Typically, if you're getting elements by class name, you're probably looking for a specific element, and you probably don't know which position it's in all honesty. And today we're going to look at, we already know if this is a collection, we know we can loop through it. Today we're going to look at ways we can loop through it and ask it questions about itself so we can find out whether or not it's the element we're looking for. Typically you wouldn't do this because you can't trust it. And if you did want this, right, the first element, get elements by class name like this at index 0, you might as well just use query selector because this and this will give you the exact same thing. So you would prefer this over that. Can you guys see my face too? Or do you, yes? Oh, okay, good. So you can see me rub my eyes. Oh, are we skipping question 1? Did I skip question 1? Oh, yeah, I did. No, we're not. Thank you. Can you see my screen as well? Yes, okay, good. So you can see everything. Okay, good to know. So I'll sit up straight. I won't slouch. I'll look at the camera. You can only see my screen. Yeah. I think it has to do with having like that little participants. There's like a little participants button or something. I can't remember exactly what it feels like to be on the other side of this. So you might have to play around with it. We'll take some time over the break to kind of figure out our stuff. Okay, so sorry, I'm going to go back to question 1. I missed that one. So using query selector all, to find and count how many banners are in the slider. To figure out some way programmatically to count them. To do this, figure out what query selector all returns and see if it has some easy way to provide you this information. So we're going to come over here, and I asked you in the previous question to grab featured slider. So we're going to refresh this page. Yeah. Okay, and we're going to go const featured slider equals document.get element by ID featured slider. Okay, we have our featured slider here. We're going to take a look at it. Okay, we come back here, and we want to use query selector all to find and count how many banners there are in the slider. So we're going to just take a quick look here, and we see banner. Oh, you know what? This timing for this exercise was particularly bad because they commented out all the banners for this COVID-19 banner that they just put up yesterday. So normally this, I apologize, this kind of caught me off guard. Normally, as I'm sure you're all aware, this banner on this page, put this here, the banner on this web page has arrows on the left and right and is usually sliding, which means there are multiple banners. But because they went ahead and commented them out, this is the only banner on the page now. A little bit unfortunate because I was hoping that you would find multiple banners. But the way I would have gone about this either way is I would have inspected the element. I would have looked at the element that I have. Okay, I think it's featured slider. Okay, and I would have then said query selector all dot banners, and I would have scoped it. Is it dot banners? Dot banner. Dot banner. And we would have got a node list of multiple banners, but we're only getting one. And I would have assumed you remembered that because it is a list, some sort of collection, it has the length property on it. So a lot of these, most collections that you encounter, so we're really familiar, we're getting more familiar with collections now. I'm starting to use that word a little bit more. Okay, so collections, again, they represent anything that are usually array-like. So strings are considered collections, a collection of characters. Arrays are collections. Objects are not your typical collection. And these node list HTML collections, those are all collections. And for the most part, they may not all have length, but as a programmer, it's not uncommon that we experiment and we test. So I might be like, oh, I get a collection back. I wonder if it has length on it. Oh, hey, it does. Look at that. You know, so it's not uncommon for us to make educated guesses about what sort of methods something might have. And to be able to, an educated guess is, oh, this is a collection, it has length, I must be able to access it with an index. Oh, sure I can, right? Sometimes you can't and you might get surprised, but we typically test our code before we actually say it's finished, and we submit it or we deploy it or we do something with it, we run it in real life. So it's not uncommon for us to go ahead and make educated guesses and do a little bit of testing. So yeah, that one didn't quite work as I expected. Sorry about that. Kind of caught me off guard. Blocked by client. That's my ad blocker at work there. See, trying to go get the ad, Google Ads, and my ad blocker's at work saying, yeah, it blocked it, not letting it go. If you edit the HTML in your browser, yeah, so I can like uncomment that. I can uncomment that stuff in my browser if I wanted to. Actually, I could just click here and edit as HTML and take these guys out. This is something I would not expect that you do. Right now, you can see those banners are coming back. So I'm just taking out the comments. And then I'll just do that many. Okay, and then if I come back over here and I make that request again, I have to make that request again. So I have to ask again, featured slider. query selector all banner. Now I have 3. Yeah. Yeah, no, this is not the thing about live yesterday. So I'll show you the difference between live and not live. Okay, so this is, we're talking about live. I'll show you that a little bit later. No, this is not live because this was a snapshot, right? This is a snapshot of what it looks like right now. If it changes, I would have, first of all, I need to assign it to a variable, banners. Okay, and then we'll copy this. Okay, so take a look. We have banners, and there's 3. Now, if I go back to these banners and I uncomment a 4th, so let's edit as HTML. Where is it? Well, it doesn't want to be edited. Edit as HTML. If I uncomment a 4th banner here, okay, the idea behind live is that now when I look at banners, it would have changed. It would have had 4 on it, even without asking a second time. Live selectors are constantly watching the DOM for changes. So you ask for it once, and you get whatever it looks like at the time, and then any changes that occur, it gets an update. So banners would have been updated and changed. Okay, but now because it's query selectors are not live, which means I would have to re-query to get the next snapshot. What does it look like now? And I can't reassign a constant variable because banners is constant, but we can take a look at it. So now you see we have 4, whereas we had 3 before. With a live, for example, get elements by class, const a live collection, get elements by class name banner. So we have our live collection. It looks a lot like our existing collection. It's got 4. It's a HTML collection and not a node list, but it's got 4 elements. Now, when we go back and uncomment another one, and we look at our live collection again, we see that it's grown. So our live collection has grown without requerying it, whereas our banners collection is still at 3, because that was when we asked at the time, it only had 3. So our live collection is going to update. So if I were to go back here and take out these banners and just delete them, delete, 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 1 banner left, and I look at my live collection again, I have 1 left. But if I look at my banners collection, I still have 3. So that's the difference between live and not live. So query selector and query selector all are not live. Get element by ID, get elements by class name are live. So that's that little checkbox there, that little check mark in that table that we looked at yesterday. Is that, yeah, something I want to cover today anyways. I'll look at it again if anyone. So yeah, if you make some changes in your HTML versus your code, it gets updated without. And so those are really important things to understand, because sometimes you might want to be watching a counter. Like when this many elements show up of this type, if we're playing tic-tac-toe, for example, and you're counting X's or something, you're counting something specific, and every time an X gets added, you know what, we'll actually see this. I don't want to go too deep into it right now. We'll actually see it. I'll use it. You probably will go into tonight not really knowing when to use them, and that's fine. And then you'll go into tomorrow not really knowing, And then tomorrow after our exercise, I'll show you and you'll have a lot more context and understanding and it'll make a lot more sense. Okay, so we keep going here. And, oh, okay, cool. So question 3, read about text content of an element. Find the first UL with the class name global nav list and group and print out the content of each of the A tags. Okay, so for this one, this won't be easy. You will need to use loops and more selectors. Okay, so first, find the UL with the class names global nav list and group. So we're going to refresh this page. We're going to go find the UL with document.get elements by, let's go query selector. Again, we use this a lot. Okay, we're looking for something with the class names global nav list and group. So it's got 2 class names. So again, if you're doing CSS selectors, global nav list as one class, dot group as the second class. And these are together with no space in between. That means we're looking for one element that contains both of these together. Okay? And this will give us the first one that it finds. And if we look at the UL, we get a UL global nav list group. But we said find the first UL with the class names blah and print out the content of each of the A tags found within using console.log. Okay, so there's A tags in here. Ah, I see these A tags. Okay, how can I get to those A tags? Now, those are not the only A tags on the page, but we do know of a little trick called scoping, where we can say UL dot, so UL represents our UL. Let's go look for all the A tags in here. Query selector all A. Or we can try a different one. Get elements by tag name A. And this will return all links. This will give us all a collection of all the elements inside of this UL that are A tags. And there we go. So we get a collection of 5 elements. All of them are A tags. And I'm asking you to print this out to the console. So what we would do is we would loop through this. So we can loop through this collection. And ideally, it's really nice to loop through collections with 4 of loops. So if you're not used to 4 of loops yet, it's a great time to get some practice in. 4, this is a link, so let's call it a link of all links. All links being our variable that has the collection in it. Okay. And we're going to simply console log the link, and I asked you to look up text content. And this will print out the text content of all the links. So the text content, as we'll see later today, is simply the content inside of an element that represents all the text. Okay, we'll look at this a little bit more deeply today. So I'm printing out the 5 pieces of text: post-secondary, international, high school, apply, and contact us. Questions on this one? Hans Manager is asking, Hans is asking, what if we used space between our class names? Right, so when we did the selector here, let me just refresh this a little bit. When we did the selector here, I'm guessing this is where you're talking about. If we put a space in between there, now we're saying, go find the element with the class global nav list, and then look inside of that element for any descendants that have the class group. And we end up with, oh, well, sorry. And we'll end up with nothing because there is no elements with the class group inside of the element with the class global nav list. We can drop this, okay, and we're lucky that we get the first item. But the thing is, because query selector only finds the first one, sometimes you want to be very specific about the one you're looking for. Otherwise, you might not get the element that you're looking for specifically, right? Because if you're generic, you might end up grabbing a different element. Query selector only grabs the first one. Part of looking for elements on a page is, one, being fairly familiar with the page that you're working with. It's uncommon that you're working with a page like this that you've never worked with before, right? And you're just like randomly trying to select stuff. Normally, you're doing this for a page that you're constructing yourself. And you have access to IDs and classes and the HTML and stuff, but you also will realize that over time, you want to change that stuff as little as possible. So you don't want to just go about, start adding classes and adding IDs all over the place. But yeah, cool. Any other questions? Okay. Last one. How many links are on the page? And this is a really easy one. So we'll say document dot get elements by tag name a dot length. So get elements by tag name will return a collection for us, and dot length will tell us the length of that collection. So there are 141 links, A tags on this page, anchor tags. Without using any indices, output the content of the third last link to console.log. So find the fourth A on a page without using indices, so like this. So essentially, what I'm looking for you to do is go through this using a loop. You can count the amount of times that you're going through it. In addition, you can inspect this a little bit more. Okay, so this is our collection. It looks kind of great, crazy. Okay, but each one of these is an element. We can open it and we can take a look, and it breaks it down. This is just Chrome being very kind. It breaks down the collection into the 0 to 100 elements, and then the 100 to 140 elements. Remember, there's 141. So the fourth one is 1, 2, 3, 4, global nav link, post-secondary. So how can we access that one without directly targeting it? And again, we can see that there's a class right on it. We can target it like that. Okay, so we can find without using indices and indicate what's in its content. So a little bit of exploration can find us what we're looking for. Okay, and we can do the same thing with the third last link. Alternatively, we can go to the parent, which is, what is the parent of this one? So if you right click on an element in here, you can reveal in the elements panel, which is over here, it will show it for you. Okay, and you can find the parent, and then we can go to children, Okay, we can do, there's a million different ways to find this element specifically. What I'm looking for here is for you to actually take a look at this collection and dig in a little bit. So look at the page a little bit further. So let's say, let me just move this, global nav link. So document dot, we would want to be specific because many of them, and see, this is where the trouble happens. Many of them have the class global nav link. So if I were to use query selector, global nav dash link, I get this one, but I'm lucky because if I was looking for international, this one here, this one here, if I was looking for international, that would be a lot harder for me to get because I couldn't get it with query selector. Because query selector will find only the first one on the page that matches. And that is, of course, this post-secondary. So it becomes a little bit more tricky when we're trying to look for when multiple elements have the same class, which is not uncommon. You'll see that today. I'll ask you to add some stuff to an existing element today, to an existing page today that has elements that are not easily distinguishable. And we'll have to dig around, okay? Same thing for the last, for the third last link. Third last link would be, we have to go down here, look at 100 to 140, and that's this one. That one's even more difficult. It has no, that's this YouTube link, okay? It has no classes on it at all. And that gets a little bit tricky. So we might want to find something that is we'll reveal in the elements panel. It's inside footer social links. So footer social links. So we'll say document dot get element. We'll use query selector. Hopefully that only returns one. Query selector dot footer social links. And this gives us that UL. We'll need to get the children of that. That's our LIs. Then we'll need to get the, I think this is the third child. And that's the YouTube one. Dot children again. And the 0. And we get that A tag. That's one way. That's actually, or we can say query selector, right? Because this, again, query selector works on any element. And this whole thing here, this evaluates down to a single element. And we can just get the A tag out of there. Actually, we can probably, no, this would be one of the best ways to get it, believe it or not. So you can see it can get a little bit trickier to get at very specific elements on a page sometimes, depending on how many there are, depending on the classes. Now, that's not a good reason to start adding classes and IDs to everything. We still want to limit that. Especially that's one of the reasons why we have all these tools, because sometimes it's harder to just get at, and that's okay, right? We have the tools available. Yeah, any questions on this one? This one's a little bit more of an exploration one, opportunity to try different things. So there's, again, I'm not looking for any specific right answer, looking to challenge you, make you think. If you interpreted the question differently and you went after it in a different manner, that's fine. As long as you're getting some practice writing these and getting some explorations. In this question, we should not use the index like 0. No, I agree. So that's why I prefer not doing this one. This children 3, that gets a little tricky. At this point, Today, right now, we're missing one little piece that would really help us with this, unfortunately, to target this specific one. But so you can do query selector. Unfortunately, that's almost the only way you can do it. You could also do this if you really wanted to. First element child dot next sibling. First element child of footer social links should be a li tag. Next sibling should be the next li tag. Next sibling again should be the following li tag. Finally, we can query selector in here, or we can do first element child of that, which gives us the a tag. Oh, I think we need one more next element sibling. Dot next element sibling. There we go. So okay. So you have how to output the content. Okay, so now the content. How to output the content? Well, we have the element dot text content, and it's a big fat empty space, right? Because it has no text content. It is simply an image, but that's fine too. Could we have just figured it out using the first element? Could we have just figured it out? Figured it would be first element and 3 next based on the index of 3. Yeah, if you're trying, like if I know it's index 3, don't know it inherently. You typically, again, don't want to use indexes that much. And you'll see, right? Right now, we have a little bit of a limited, we don't have the full picture because we have 2 more. Well, today's class is a really important one, and it really adds a lot to what we're looking at right now. So it'll help shed a lot more light on some of these questions that I think you have. And you'll start to see we typically don't directly access things by elements. Sometimes we do, but oftentimes we do it in a different way. Okay, so maybe sometimes, like for now, we might just have to accept what you know, and then when you start to learn about the new stuff today, I think it'll start to make a lot more sense. Okay. I think now might be a really good time for a break. So are there any more questions? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the share here, and we'll take a break. We will come back. Spotlight video. What's that do? We will come back and we will continue with the next lesson in what time is it now? 9:55. So 10 after 10. Okay, I'll just keep the meeting running. You can just take off your headphones or whatever. Everyone's on mute anyways, and I can't see any of you. Does anyone have their camera on? I can't tell if Willie's moving or not. No, no one does. I think I have all your cameras turned off anyways. Okay, so yeah, come back 10 after 10. We'll see you then. I'll keep the meeting running so you can stick around. You don't have a camera. Okay, that's fine. Just curious. All right, so we'll see you in a bit. we can do just about anything we want to the DOM. But first we have to find the element that we want to modify, right? So that was yesterday's lesson, is walking through the DOM, finding the elements we want, and then today modifying it. Okay. So the first thing we're going to look at is, and I'll start sharing my screen again. Share. Okay. We're going to look at, so I have a bunch of stuff that's already pre-done. Okay, and that's just because I need code. Today, there's a lot of little code samples today. All this stuff, by the way, I pulled directly out of your reading. So you don't need my copy of it. It's all in your reading. So if you go through your readings, all the code samples are pulled directly out of it, which is really nice. So I will go through it and explain it on my own, but then you can always refer back to your reading if you want to see them again. One of the things that we haven't looked at yet, we've been operating exclusively in our console for yesterday. However, that is not a realistic expectation, right? That's not how we would typically interact with the DOM, as I'm sure you can imagine. We would typically interact with the DOM. We would typically interact with the DOM in the same way that we've been writing our JavaScript, and that is with a JavaScript file that's attached to an HTML file. Okay, so I have an HTML file here. Okay, it's called test. Okay, and then I have another one called app.js. I don't know what's in here. Oh, that's in there. What's in here? Okay, so I'm going to copy all this stuff over to here. Save that. So I don't need this assignment.js. So essentially I have this sort of setup here. Okay, I don't know if you can see my zoomed in screen. App.js and test.js. Okay, so I have test.html, app.js. Here, I'll show you what my test.html looks like. It's just a really simple web page, really simple HTML page. However, it has the script tag at the top. Now, this is very much more like what you would expect to be working with in your programs. Okay. So one of the things we need to quickly talk about is order. And I have mentioned this before, that when we're writing our JavaScript files, we can put our script tags anywhere we want on the page. We can put them in the head. We can put them in the body. Or we can put it at the beginning of the body or at the end of the body. And the big question is, what is the difference between all three of these things? And the answer is, now that we have the ability to go look for elements, okay, there is a significant difference. So I have all this text commented out. Don't worry about it right now. Okay. But what I'm going to show you is I'm going to take the stuff that we learned from yesterday. Okay. I'm going to go find this element input. There's only one element on the page. Well, there's a couple. There's body too, right? But we're going to look for this element. Okay. Let's grab it by its ID. So I'm going to type into my app.js const input equals document dot get element by ID ELEM console dot log input. Okay, so I'm getting that element and I'm going to log it out to the input. Or I'm sorry, I'm going to save it. I'm going to assign it to this variable input, and I'm going to log it out to the console. We'll save that. Notice where my script tag is. It is in the head of my HTML. Okay, and we're going to open this HTML. And we're going to inspect this page and see what the console printed out. Oh, I have some uncommented code in here. We'll refresh. So save. Sorry about that. Refresh this page. And we notice, ours says, is there a breakpoint in here? Okay, and we notice that it prints out null. Okay, so it did not find the element with the ID ELEM, even though if we look at in our elements tab and we look here, we can clearly see there is an element with an ID ELEM. And if I were to take this chunk of code right here, document.getElementById, and copy it and paste it in here and run it, I do get that element. It's not null. And that might be a little bit confusing. Why am I getting the element? Why am I, when I print the element from my JavaScript, it prints out null, but over here, when I copy and paste into my console, it grabs the element? And the answer lies with this line of code right here, line 7, the script tag. So the location of the script tag matters dramatically because things happen in order. So when this line of code runs, when the browser parses the HTML and it gets to this line of code, this line, it goes and it executes this immediately. But you'll realize that the rest of the page has not been drawn yet in the browser. The rest of the page has not been rendered. Okay, so the browser does something called rendering. So it renders the HTML. So in reality, this body tag and this input tag does not exist yet. And we're already trying to get that element. So you'll see if I move this script tag to the bottom after the element has been drawn, okay, and run this again, and just refresh this page, you'll notice this null will turn into this element. It won't be null anymore. It will be that element. And you see, it's no longer null. On line 2, it's console logging the element. And that's because we moved it below to the bottom of the body tag. So it's not uncommon for you to see script tags in one of two places, either at the top because of a very specific reason, which I'll talk about shortly, or at the bottom right before the closing body tag. Okay, so it's waiting. They put it at the bottom before the closing body tag, so it gives the page an opportunity to render all of the DOM. So all the other elements on the page before it runs any JavaScript. Sometimes you'll see it at the top, and you'll see it with something that we haven't looked at yet, an attribute called defer. And what defer does, and you'll note that there's no equal sign here, okay? This is a Boolean attribute. It's either there or it's not there. And so you can say equals 1 or equals true, or it really equals anything. It doesn't matter. If it's either there or it's not there. And in this case, it is there. And if we hover over it, we get to see this Boolean attribute is set to indicate to a browser that the script is meant to be executed after the document has been parsed. Scripts with the defer attribute will prevent the DOM content loaded from firing until the script is loaded. What this defer attribute, so in short, what this essentially means is don't run this script until all the DOM has been loaded. So this little piece, if we decide to put it up in the head, this little piece essentially guarantees that this JavaScript file won't start running until all of the body has been loaded. So we have, again, we have two options. We can either move our script to the bottom, which you will see, not uncommon, with no defer tag, okay, and that will work. Or we can have our script at the top in the head with a defer tag. And that, if I refresh this page, will end up with the exact same thing. Okay. Any questions about that? All right. Very good. Oh, so where do people usually put the script? No problem. Okay, so you'll see it in both. You'll see it in a variety of places. There's actually multiple different ways to manage this. I think, so when I was programming, I tend to prefer to put it at the top just because it's a little bit easier to manage, but you will find that some people say, put this at the bottom or put it here. I think it depends a little bit of what you're doing in your JavaScript. And for the moment, our JavaScript files are doing fairly simple things, so we don't need them to start running right away. So there is a reason why you might want to put your script up here without the defer flag. And that is because you do want your script running right away, because your script is going to start doing stuff that you want it to start working on in the background, and you're okay with it happening before the body loads. So you would typically, right now, I would typically prefer this over this. You could put defer. Why would you ever use defer when you could just put it at the bottom consistently if it does the same thing? Again, we have a lot of different tools to do a lot of different things. Putting your script at the bottom and defer do slightly different things. When you really dig down into them, they do slightly different things. And you can see that when I skipped over some of the documentation from here. Shoot, get out of the way. When I skipped over some of the documentation in defer, so let me highlight over here. It says, oh, come on. Sorry, I can't read it. I'm reorganizing my windows here. But before, after the document has been parsed, but before firing DOM content loaded. Now, I skipped over that because we don't know what DOM content loaded is yet. And that is something that occurs. There's different events that occur over the lifetime of a web page. And so defer does something very specific with respect to that. But for our experience right now, either would work. So as you start to become a more proficient programmer, doing more low-level things on the page with JavaScript, that might start to play a role. So then you might have to make the decision between, oh, I need to put this at the bottom, or, oh, I need to put this at the top with the defer flag on it. So you will, at some point, have to make that distinction. But right now, we don't have to. For now, it's really up to you. So whichever one you choose works fine. Okay. You will see both. If you go into like a production environment right now in the industry, you will see both. You will probably see a lot at the bottom. If we went to the, actually, I can almost guarantee if we look at the MITT webpage, you will not see that defer flag at all. You'll see most of the scripts at the top, a bunch of scripts at the top, and a bunch of scripts at the bottom. So let's just take a quick look. And again, not the best page to look at for for stuff. But you know what? A lot of people are way, way behind, because this, in reality, this HTML, I would suspect, has not changed in any great depth in years. Someone created it years ago, and we've just been adding on and removing stuff, but never doing a full revamp. And so if we open this head, we'll see a bunch of scripts. We'll see a bunch of stuff, okay? But we'll see a bunch of script tags. See, we have this right here, script tag, okay? No defer on it. I don't see any defer. I see a lot of other things. Don't worry about, so I have it highlighted. Don't worry about those other things right now. Again, another one, no defer. Again, another one, no defer. Another one, no defer. And then some inline JavaScript, okay? And then, so more and more. Look at all the scripts in here. It's crazy. No defer, no defer. I don't see a single defer on any one of the scripts in here. And there's about 20 scripts in here, okay? And this is the head, okay? Now we go down to the body. Let's close this head. And we'll look at the end of the body tag. And there's a script right in the middle. That's really bad, okay? But close it, close to the end of the body tag, we see some other weird things, iframes. We've never looked at those, don't worry about that. But we see a bunch of other scripts in there too. So it's not uncommon to mix this concept up, right, and have both. Again, a lot of it has to depend with, sometimes people just don't know, and they're like, I'll put it in the bottom. I'll put it in the top. Oh, I put it in the top and it doesn't work. Now I'll move it to the bottom. And so you get this type of mess, right? Where you have multiple developers working on something. They don't really know what it does. They don't really know where to put it. And so some goes in the top, some goes in the bottom because it just works. It's magic for them. And that is the reality of the type of industry we work in, is people don't necessarily take the time to fully understand why and how and what the differences are between a lot of these things, not just script tags, but pretty much everything. They need more than a part-time programmer. They need a full-time programmer. They have a full-time programmer, but he's got so much on his plate. And one of the things is you want to be careful about what you change. It's not easy. It's not easy to make updates. So, but this is pretty consistent with the type of stuff I've seen in the industry. Any sort of shop. Bold will have this. IQ Metrics will have this. Great West Life will have this. IBM will have this. Google and Facebook will have this, because you inevitably end up with pages where multiple people work on it. Some people don't care, and it's just too hard to manage. You end up with a lot of stuff that you need to go back and fix eventually, but it's rare that people end up getting the opportunities to go back and fix it. Okay, so that is document tags. Now that doesn't really have anything to do with modifying the DOM, but it's important to know because we will be working inside here. And if you didn't, we will be working inside our app.js file for the most part. I'll be flipping back between the browser console and this app.js file just to show you some stuff and do some exploration. But my expectation is that you were working inside a JavaScript file for the most part. And if you don't have this script tag in the right place, you're going to run into all sorts of problems. So that's pretty important. So we have our script tag in the right place. We're console logging our stuff. Okay, no problem. And we keep rolling. So first thing that we can do is we can check node names. So one of the things that we didn't do yesterday, we were digging through the DOM, but we never took a look at node names. So a node name. So if we said yesterday that everything is essentially a node, okay? Everything is a node. Elements are nodes. And so we have two different types of nodes. We have element nodes and text nodes, right? And text nodes are essentially like content nodes. And then within element nodes, we have more specific types. But we never asked any questions. We got our elements, but we never asked any questions about itself. We asked, well, I guess we did. We asked some questions like, can you give me your next sibling? Can you tell me your parent? Right? Those are some questions that we asked, but we never asked any questions like, what sort of node are you? And obviously, we should be able to ask those things, right? Because if you can imagine, if we have 141 elements on our page and we're looping through each element, we don't, like I mentioned yesterday, we don't necessarily want to grab a specific element by the index. We may want to ask it questions before and say, are you this type of node? If you are this type of node, I want to do this thing. And so one of the ways we can do that, document.body, and this applies to any node. I'm just going to grab the body node, okay? I'm just going to grab the body node for ease of use. It's just a node it's just an element or a node like any other, but all nodes have a method or a property called node name property. And you'll see it returns, node name returns a string with the name of the node in it in capital letters, all caps, all the time. Okay? And that is one way we can figure out what type of node we're dealing with. So if we go over here and we see this input node, it's an input element, but it's also a node. Remember, all elements are nodes. And we go document.get element by ID, ELEM. So we got an element by ID, and we wanted to know the type of node it is, or the type of element it is. We can say node name. And it tells us, it's an input, right? So it'll match. This will always match the tag name, but it's all caps. So you can end up with P's, you can end up with spans, you can end up with ULs and inputs. Okay, so we're able to start asking it questions about itself to figure out the type of node it is. Any questions on that? Pretty straightforward. Okay, they all have this. All elements have this. All nodes have this, not just elements. All nodes, text nodes and element nodes. Okay. Sorry, I don't know if I'm pausing long enough for people to ask questions. So we'll figure it out. Okay, yesterday I asked you to take a look at something called something called text content. Text content. Sorry, I just have some notes here that I want to look at. Okay, text content. Okay, so we can look at the text content of an element. And this could be any element we want. And it will give us all the text content of that element on the entire page. So for example, if we go over here to MITT, the MITT page, and I say document, and this is going to get crazy, okay? Document.body.text content. Now, body itself, it as a tag may not have text content. But the way text content works is it goes through all the descendants as well and collects all the text content and creates one giant string out of it. Okay, so let's take a look at what document.body.text content looks like on the MITT webpage, or could be any giant webpage, could be Amazon, okay? And we get, and it's not even done, right? It says show more. Okay, so it is all the text content on the page, all appended together as a string. It even has weird tags built in, but generally it is only text. Sometimes you get some other weird stuff. So text content is the representation of all the text on the page, not elements and tags. This is a little bit of an anomaly. I suspect that it's because there is some error in it somewhere and it's showing up. But sometimes you will find script tags in there, but typically not. Alternatively, there is another way to look at the text, and this is only user visible text. Text content would include comments. We also have a method called inner text. And this is only text, again, going through all the descendants of the element itself that is visible to the user. So document.body.inner text. So we'll go through all the elements, all the descendants in the page and print out the text. Give us the user visible text. So what the user could see in the browser as the page is rendered. So that's a little bit different than text content, as you can see. Okay, just another way to look at stuff. Then we have a third way of looking at things, and that is inner HTML. Inner HTML gives us a text, a string representation of all the text content and all the tags inside. So we'll take a quick look at that. So you can see this is a string representation, okay? So it represents it as one giant string, and it includes everything. You can see style tags, you can see div tags, you can see a tags, but you can also see the stuff inside of it. You must be wondering, like, wow, why would you want this stuff? Why would you, what could you ever want with this? And the answer is, well, sometimes you want to grab it to ask a question. Now, in our case, maybe not. Maybe not on the page. Typically, document.body, you wouldn't want to grab it and ask it questions, but maybe you're looking to see if you have the correct global nav link, right? We identified that there are many links on this page, right? So const links equals document dot get elements by class name, and we have a series of links. And maybe we want to look for a link that has a specific piece of text, like international. So I might go through my links for let link of links, and I might ask it, which of my links console log found. So if my link has text content equal to that looks like capital international console log, I hope this works, found. You'll have to forgive the lack of indentation. Otherwise, console log link.text content. So we'll get to see what's in it anyways, in case it doesn't find it. And that, and that, and that. So what this is going to do, this is going to go through this collection. It's going to look at the text content for each one of these. If it finds, I'll answer your question in a second. If it finds one, it will print out found. Text content equals international. console log found, otherwise console log. See if that works. Unexpected token, right. And it did find it. So post-secondary, so it didn't find this one, right? This is post-secondary, but it did find the second one. And so what this demonstrates is that we can use the text content to do things like find tags that has specific text in it on a page in case we're looking for something specific. So as I mentioned before, we don't necessarily want to use indices, like in element, the link with index 3, right? Because what if that changes? What if tomorrow they change the MITT webpage and now there's another link on it? And maybe the index is not, the element that we were dealing with yesterday, index 3, is not the same element anymore. Maybe it's different. Maybe we want to approach it from this type of perspective, okay, with the text content to see what's inside. And so that's another way that we can do it. Semicolon, not a colon, yeah. Okay. So that's text content. We could do the same thing with inner HTML if we're looking for something that contains specific HTML. The other really interesting thing about text content is both text content, inner text, and inner HTML is they're not just getters. We're not just getting this information. Believe it or not, we can also use it to set information. So I'm going to go grab this global nav link post-secondary. I'm just going to get the first one. Const a, let's call it post equals document dot get element by, we'll say query selector dot global nav link. And I believe it should be that one, post-secondary. Perfect. Okay, so we have this. You can see it highlighted up there. I am going to say post.text content equals John is the best. Enter. And suddenly the text on the page has been updated. Okay, so we can use text content to set new text. Additionally, we can do the same thing with inner HTML. Inner HTML, I'm going to set a string with some HTML. We'll say a span. John is the best. Or maybe an input. Let's make it an input. That should be interesting. So I am injecting HTML, a string of HTML right into this page using inner HTML. And watch what happens. It changed into an input. Now I can start typing in it. And it didn't like that. That's fine. That's fine. Okay. So what is the difference between inner HTML and text content? And really the difference is when we're getting the content with inner HTML, we get the HTML with it. When we're getting text content or inner text, we're just getting text, no elements. Now, when we're setting it on the other side, when we say text content equals input, watch what happens to my post-secondary link. When I set text content and include HTML tags, it does not properly render the HTML tags. It prints them out as plain text. If I wanted to render them properly, what I would have to do is say inner text. Inner HTML. And this is essentially telling the browser, don't take this text, Don't take any HTML you find in this string and render it as plain text. Take any HTML elements you find in this string and render it as HTML. And this is what we get. Okay. In addition, you'll see that it doesn't say post-secondary here anymore. And that's because text content and inner text overrides everything that was there before. It's destructive. So if you wanted to append to what was there before, for example, if I want to make post.text content, we'll go back to what it originally was, equals post-secondary. Okay. If I wanted to append to this, I would have to do my typical concatenation. So take what was in the text content originally and add another word to it, or another piece of sentence. So take what was in there originally plus equals, right? And add some more strings to it. And then we get updated stuff. And this, so because this is so destructive, I can do something like this: document.body.text content equals empty string. And watch what happens. We go to our console, we go to our elements, and we look in our body, and our body has nothing in it anymore. It's all gone. And so you have to not necessarily be careful, just understand what text content does. There's no way back from this. Okay, that's all gone. The only way back from this is refreshing, right? Remember, we're operating on our local copy. This is what we call client side. So it's not on, so MITT has already sent me the web page, and now I'm receiving it into my browser, I'm rendering it. The JavaScript that we apply is being applied on the client side, me being the client on a local copy of the web page. This does not affect the web page on the server. That would be crazy, okay? So that is inner HTML and text content. So we can use inner HTML to build some very interesting stuff fairly easily. If we come back over here to my page, my virtually empty page, I can say document.body.innerHTML, and I can build any string that I want. I can make some divs. I can say hello world. Okay. In there, I can give it an H1. Maybe my hello world is an H1. And we can inject that. It will abide if this page had a style sheet. Any styles that I added here would abide by those styles. We can say class equals, right? And again, you might want to use backticks here so you can more easily put special characters in. Class equals hello space world. So we can add classes, we can add attributes, we can do anything we want here, and we can inject it right into the HTML. And so now we get this. Now, because I said the inner HTML, a body, inner HTML, just like text content, is destructive. If we don't say plus equals, okay, it will destroy whatever was there before. But if we say plus equals, we're now appending it to the end. So that's inner HTML and text content. Okay, any questions on either of those? Fun stuff. Super cool. Now things are starting to get really interesting. No, this will not affect CSS. However, right, like we could, and we know this, we may have forgotten, but we can include style tags directly on the element. Right? We can include style tags directly on the element. And because remember how CSS applies, CSS cascades, and the strongest, most powerful CSS is CSS that is on the element itself. And actually, generally, when you see any CSS on an element itself, it's typically added from JavaScript. We cannot, we won't learn how to modify our CSS files from JavaScript. We're only going to learn how to modify HTML. We can inject style tags into our HTML that contains CSS, but we won't be looking at how to modify CSS files. But no, it won't typically affect the CSS unless we override CSS styles by adding style tags to the element itself, the style attribute. Good question. Now, having said that, that's a really good segue into our next little piece is, okay, great. So we can get text content, we can get inner HTML, we can set text content, we can set inner HTML. So we know how we can output HTML just using a string. We can get the name of the tag that we're looking at. Okay. In addition to this, we can, and we're looking at that here, we can get a bunch of additional information and set a bunch of additional information on our tags. So we're really looking again at this concept of a getter and a setter. So getters usually are like text content, right? Document.body, document.body.text content. This is a getter. The setter would be document.body.text content equals, and then we're assigning it, and that sets it, right? So that kind of concept of getter and setter. What's going on here? Okay. We have a variety of additional things, pieces on our elements specifically that we can get and set via properties that are typically pre-created for us. So if we were to go grab our element, which is this input element up here, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. Okay. So yeah, it's running my JavaScript already because I have it. So I have to refresh this page here. Okay. That's strange. Okay. So we get my element. So my element is just this input element with the ID ELEM. Okay. So we have this input element, and we already talked about being able to ask it about its node name. Great. Right. We get its node name back, but we can also ask it a bunch of other stuff. Like, what sort of type are you? Oh, type is text. Okay, cool. How about your ID? Oh, your ID is ELEM. And notice all these things are coming back as strings. Okay, so JavaScript, or the DOM, has a lot of built-in properties that correspond to these HTML attributes. So this is a property, right? Just like length. And there's a lot of built-in ones. Not all of them are built-in. And so there's some of them that you won't be able to get just like this. And the answer to the question, well, which ones are built in and which ones are not, is you'll have to take a look. But I would say for 95% of the ones, 99% of the ones that you're using on a daily basis, they're all built in. Okay, so we can ask for its ID. We can also ask for its value. Okay, and the value in here is empty. And this is kind of cool. When I enter a value, okay, I can actually get that value out. So I manually entered a value into this string, into this input here, and I'm able to pull the information out using the dot value. And this only applies to inputs typically, right? Because if I ask for the text content of this element, it's empty string, because this element, this input element, has no text content. Instead, this input element has a value. But here's the really cool thing about all of these is I can't just get the ID, but I can set the ID. And now if we look at this element, remember, there can only be one ID on the element. And I look at that ID, and you'll see that the ID has changed. Or I can say, get out of here. Maybe the type of this element is not going to be text anymore. If we remember our input elements from when we explored HTML, there was also password. And if you remember what password looked like, it gave us little like asterisks or balls or whatever to represent the characters that you typed into the input. So watch what happens. Right, so that input now is a different style. And we can also set the value as well. So not only can we get the value from the input, but we can also set the value of the input. And now this input has the value 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in it. Okay? So we're able to both get and set attributes in our HTML. Now, I'm only using ones that already exist, but we can add new ones, right? This has no classes, I don't think. Let's take a quick look. This has no classes on it. So let's add a class. Now, there's a little bit different. It's class name. It's not class, so it's class name test. But we can add a new one, class name. And if we look at the element now, it has the class test. So we can create new attributes as well. Thank you very much. Okay, so we can create new classes as well. It's very weird in here right now. There's people who are just walking around literally disinfecting everything. So I just had someone come into my class and wipe down everything to disinfect it. And that seems to be their job, is they're just walking around the school, wiping down things and disinfecting. Can you add more than one class? Can we ever add more than one class? Of course we can. Now just remember, classes are separated by spaces. So test and something else. Just gonna move this here, back up. So I actually am just adding 4 classes. Now here's the thing. Here's the thing, class name, all of these are destructive, right? So this will override whatever was there before. So I added 4 classes. My class and something else. These are 4 classes because they're separated by spaces. You cannot add more than one ID. I don't know what would happen if you put a space in the ID as, you can, but you shouldn't. You're gonna get some weird stuff. But typically this is not how we would work with classes. We can get the class name like this, and we can add the class name. There's a better way to manage classes. I'll show you that in 5 minutes. Okay. So we've got a bunch of different properties. Can you use plus equals? Sure we can. Yeah, but again, better way to manage this stuff. For any other value or like for any other ones of these, yeah, they're all strings. So we can get the string out, we can set the string, and we can concatenate. So we can use the plus equals. We can append to it for all of these, for all these properties. So we can use the plus equals. Okay. For any of the ones that, so we also have some other methods. So we have my element. So we have some additional methods like has attribute. Does it have the attribute type? True, it does. Does it have the attribute style? False. it doesn't have a style attribute, right? And if you look at the element, you can see that it does not. So we can ask it questions. In addition, we can, again, we can get attributes. So like I said, we don't always have these properties already built in for some of them. And if we don't, we can do it like this. Get attribute, and then just any string representing an attribute type. So this will give us the value of the attribute type. So again, this is the same as saying type, but in some cases, as I mentioned, we don't have these awesome shortcuts, just .type, that give us that. So we might need to use get attribute in some cases, some rare cases. We can, and we also have, if we have a get attribute, you can assume that we also have a set attribute that takes two strings. Again, this is all in your reading. The name and the value. So text. So the name of the attribute and the value. And this will set the attribute to text. And you see it went back to text. And then finally, we can remove an attribute. If we want to delete, remove attribute, and we just give it the string of the attribute we want to remove, and it disappears, apparently. It is gone. But I guess inputs by default are text, so it doesn't matter if it has that attribute. So it actually doesn't empty it out. It actually removes it entirely. Questions? Is it strict to use single quotes and double quotes? No, no, it doesn't care. Again, so pretty much everywhere in JavaScript, strings are strings. I'm mixing quotes here because I'm not paying attention to what I'm doing, okay? But strings are strings. Double quotes, single quotes, and backticks are all considered equal. Yep, backticks as well. Yeah, all considered equal. They're all strings, right? And if, so type, and type are equal, right? And same with backticks type. They're all the same thing, so it doesn't matter. Yeah, good question. Okay. Okay, managing classes. So we can, as I mentioned, we can manage these classes as well. So with this element, what is it called? What is it? Do I have a name for it? Let's refresh. So let's get this. Let's get this element. Const lem document dot get element by ID. Okay, and class management, like I said, we can say class name equals blah. So 1, 2, 3, that's 3 different classes, okay? So we get 3 different classes on this thing, 1, 2, and 3. Now, there's actually better ways to manage this, and that is through a method called class list. Now, class list, it's this weird list here, but it's actually a property that has more things on it. So we can ask it questions. One, you can iterate through the class list, right? So I get a list, essentially an array. Again, don't worry about this value, okay? It's these DOM token list 3 classes on it, 1, 2, and 3. You can iterate over this and see each class in there. It's essentially an array of classes, an array-like object, okay? But we can also do other things with it, like we can add a class, a single class. This is non-destructive. It won't destroy what was there before, 1, 2, and 3. So if we look at it now, it has 4 classes, 1, 2, 3, and then single class, 4 classes. We can also remove a class, any class that we want. And if we look at this again, you'll see that it's removed class 2. All gone. So now it's back to 3 classes. We can also do what's called toggle. And this is actually super useful, you'll find. Shortly enough, you'll find. Toggle does one of 2 things. If the class already exists, it will remove it. So in this case, the class 1 already exists on this element, and so toggle removes it. And it's gone. And it also returns something, tells you whether or not it added it or removed it, whether it exists or not. If it doesn't exist, which it doesn't exist right now, it adds it. And so it's back. The order of classes don't matter, so don't worry about that. So it was at the beginning and now it's at the end. Doesn't matter. Order of classes don't matter. So you can toggle on and off. And actually that's really useful for that show and hide thing. Or like this little sidebar here, for example, would have a toggle on it. The toggle is when I click on this thing, the sidebar gets a class big. When I click on it, take off that class. And so the CSS that applies to that class gets applied at the time, right? Like the CSS still works. So if you have CSS for a specific class and you add that class, then things will change according to the CSS. If you remove that class, then it will remove those styles. So when you see a lot of things changing style on a page, it's usually because we're adding a class to it at that time. So this hover, for example, that's a class being changed. We hover over this, a new class is added. When we move out, the class is removed, and the CSS is applied. So things like display none, display block to hide and show elements are often used. You may see people adding or removing classes to show and hide elements as people hover over it. So this toggle one is really useful. And again, if that doesn't really fully make sense to you right now, trust me, it will, okay? And then finally, you can ask, do you contain one of these classes? Does it contain the class test? No. Does it contain the class 2? No. Which classes does it contain? 3. Does it contain the class 3? Yes, it does. So we can ask it, do you have this class? So class list is a much better way at managing classes over class name. Class name is simply a string. Sure, you can split this string on spaces and you can append to it and you can concatenate, but this is a way, way better way of managing it. This is a way more thorough tool. So class list. Questions on class list? Okay, I'm going to update my test HTML a little bit. I thought I had some additional stuff. Okay. We are going to add this new piece here. So it looks like this. Okay. So I added, and this could be a div, it could be anything. Okay, it doesn't have to be an article, just any element. And you're going to see some new types of attributes here. Okay, and these are called data attributes. okay? And they're unlike anything we've seen before. And the purpose behind these data attributes is to allow us as developers to store some arbitrary information, arbitrary meaning whatever we want, on elements in the HTML. Sometimes you might encounter a situation where you're like, I just need to like store something on this element because I want to come back to it later and pick up that piece of information or something. Again, some of these things, they may not make complete sense. It's hard to really understand the need for all of these things until you're put in a position where you have to do it. But these data elements are very common. They were added 6-7 years ago. So it gives us a special attribute that just for developers that we can use to store arbitrary information. They all start with the word data dash, data dash, data dash. Anything after can be anything we want. So data dash columns, data dash index dash number. We can make up these. We can make these up to be whatever we want. Data dash parent. So any developer that comes in and sees this automatically knows that these are specific to the developer, and they are there just to hold arbitrary information. Using JavaScript, we can actually get that information out of it. Okay, so I have a little piece of JavaScript here. Okay, we're going to get the element by the ID. Okay, so that's going to grab this element with the ID electric cars. And we can use something called dataset, a property called dataset to access any data attributes. Actually, I'll do this manually. Okay, so we'll comment this out and we'll head on over to the browser. So you'll see it in action. We'll refresh this, just a piece of text, okay, and we'll go get that element. Article, that element, has a property called dataset. And you can see when you ask for the dataset, it returns you this, like, again, it looks like an object. And it is an object that represents all the data attributes on the element that you just asked for, if it has any. If it doesn't, it'll be an empty object, okay? And then we can access each one of those individually and get the values back. Or, obviously, we can set those values. Okay, so again, a place for us to get and set arbitrary data that we may need at some point later. And one of the interesting things you'll notice is that although we indicated data dash name, data dash the name, JavaScript has parsed that and it drops that data dash component and it refers to it simply as columns. So it's data dash columns, but JavaScript says, no, I know what that data dash means. It means that's there for you. Put it in the data set. That's what the data dash means. So columns, index dash number. And then you look at this index dash number and you look at it in JavaScript over here and it is camel cased it for us. So remember, when we're dealing in CSS, HTML, we use dashes to represent multiple words. But when we're dealing in JavaScript, we use camel case. And JavaScript is smart enough to manage that for us. So we can properly represent it in HTML using dashes, and JavaScript will pull that out and camel case it for us. So we can say parent and we get cars back, and we can say something else. We can add new ones. New one equals 10. So we can add just any sort of arbitrary information. So this will come in. Notice I use camel case here. When we look at this element in the elements browser, this will have data dash new dash 1 equals 10, string 10. data-new-1 equals string 10. So we can just set arbitrary information that I can then go and pick up later. Okay, we're going to be doing logic on these web pages after, right? Because we're going to make these interactive. And so we're going to be needing to ask questions and check things and store data and get data. Now, we're still a little bit away from that. After tomorrow, everything will become clear. But that's data, data attributes. Any questions on data attributes? Just a warning right now. I think I'm going to go a little bit over time, probably just a little bit past 11:30. I hope that's okay. I think if I go to 11:40, I'll be able to finish everything, and then we won't have to come back and do a lecture after. We can just finish off everything. Otherwise, we'll have to restart this meeting and do some re-recording and stuff like that. Is anyone not okay with that? If anyone's not okay with that, let me know. If you need to eat, go heat up your food and then bring it and sit in front of the computer. Okay. You can be eating right now. I don't know. I can't see you. Okay. If anyone's not okay, let me know. Okay. And or, hey, just record it and then come back and watch the last 10 minutes of the episode. Okay. So, modifying CSS. Okay, so we can do data, we can store arbitrary information. How do we modify the CSS? Now, I already showed you one way to modify the CSS. We can add style tags directly to an element and insert that element. But what if I want to modify the CSS of an existing element on the page, right? So let's create an element. We have an element already right here called electric cars. Okay, and I want to modify some of this CSS. So we can do this. So I'll refresh this page. We'll grab that element. That element has the ID electric cars. Const ele equals document.get element by ID. Electric cars. Great. We have that ele. Elements also have a style property. Okay. And the style property is not settable. Okay, we can't do this. If this works, I'll be very surprised. Oh, it worked. Okay, that's not what I expected. Typically, what we're looking to do is do this. Style dot. Now we have access to any of the styles. Color equals green. This is typically how we would do it. Color equals green. Background color equals blue. Okay, notice normally in CSS we say background dash color, but this is JavaScript and it properly camel cases all of that. So we can say element.style.background color equals blue, and it sets that background to blue. One of the things you need to know about this is it doesn't modify the CSS file. It modifies the style tag or the style attribute on the element itself. So this setting, modifying CSS in this manner, is typically going to override anything in your style sheet, which is great, which means we don't have to mess around with selectors, right? This is the strongest. So if we want to apply some sort of style directly, we can do it using the style tags. One of the things that we can't get, font family, is we can't get any of the styles that were set from the CSS sheets. So, and that's a problem, right? Like, so the only information, the only style we can get using this, the style property is the style from the style attribute. So I can ask it about its background color. And it will tell me I'm blue, but I can't ask it about its display. Like, what type of display do you have? Are you block? Are you span? We know what it is. We can see what it is. But when I ask it using the style property, it doesn't know, because it doesn't pull that from the CSS. Instead, what we have to do is we need to ask the browser about something, about the tag, using something called get computed style. We pass it the element, and then we ask it using this method. Again, this is in your reading. Get computed style. So the way that get computed style works is it's essentially the browser's final interpretation of the style of right? Because the way CSS works is it cascades, right? Oh, it reads all the CSS files from top to bottom and it says, oh, I'm applying this. Oh, I see. Now I'm going to apply this. Now I'm going to apply this. Now I'm going to apply this, right? And they all apply. And finally, it ends up with a final value. And that's the computed style, the rendered style. So we pass it the element that we want, get computed style. And then we ask for what we're looking at, the CSS property we're looking for. So display. So I want to know what the browser calculated for the display of this element. And we get block. It's a display block. So if we ever wanted to actually get like the margin of it, we can find out 0 pixels. There's no margin. Margin top, 0 pixels, right? So, but I can never get that via ele.style.margin top, because it doesn't exist. But I can set it to 10 pixels. But again, this sets it on the attribute. Now I'm curious, will get computed style give me that information? And it does. Okay. So again, with this style property, it's a lot like that. It's a lot like the class list. Like this is a lot like the class list. We can do it style and set color, or we can do it in this other more like just a giant string of style. So you can say ele style is only used to set element. Yes, correct. We only use it to set the element. So we can say ele.css text is another way we can do it. CSS text? Yeah. Sorry. Style.css text. And now we can just type in a string of CSS text. Color is green, color is yellow, semicolon, background, color, purple. Notice I'm writing in CSS here. I'm not doing camel case. Purple, semicolon, margin, 30 pixels, semicolon, enter. Can you set margin or display in CSS text? Sure, I can. Display, span. You can do anything. This will set it directly on the element. Okay. Now the H tag, so if we go look at this, it's still a div. Oh, it didn't like my span, display span. Oh, sorry, display span is not, display span is not legit. It's display inline. There we go. It just ignored my error. And now it's display inline. Just ignore my error. But notice, this was destructive. It destroyed whatever was there before. So if I take off that display and I reset that, it changes everything. Or I can just manage it with individual properties. Style. Display equals inline. And these are all strings. Again, this is all in your reading. Okay, if you're looking, I know there's a lot of little things we're going through. So just, and you don't have to read all about it, but it's worth it to just quickly browse through the reading and say, oh yeah, I remember John said something about style. I remember John said something about this. I remember John said something about that. It's all there. It's all in your reading. You just got to find the right thing, the right little piece of text, and then just read up on that for more information. Questions? Okay. And last but not least, inserting HTML. Inserting new HTML. So we already looked, is get computed style, same window. 100% of everything we do is in the same window. You cannot access JavaScript. The browser restricts JavaScript to only operating on the tab that you're on. You cannot work, I cannot write JavaScript here to operate on this tab over here or that tab over here. Only this tab. So does that make sense? Does that answer your question? Oh, is get computed style same as window? Like window.get computed style. Yeah, everything is on window, actually. That's something that I never mentioned. Window, even our variables are on window pretty much. So like if I just had a variable a equals 5, and then I said window.a, 5. Window is essentially the global scope. We don't really talk about that though. Not super important. And yeah, so window.get computed style is the same thing as just get computed style. Same thing. I think that's what you mean. That's what you're wondering. Yes, okay, yeah, same thing. Don't worry too much about window. We won't be looking at it very much. There are some special things about window that we might be asking, but pretty limited. And when we get there, if we need to, I'll bring it up at that time. Okay, finally, inserting HTML. So this is where things get really interesting. So I'm gonna refresh this. We have our piece of div right here. One of the things, so we're going to create and insert new HTML. I already showed you, hey, we can create it with a string. We can use inner HTML and we can just insert it right just like that. But we need more ways to do this. Trust me, like that way is very brute force. So we need some more better tuned ways of doing this. And one of the better ways that we can do it, a couple better ways. One way is by using something called create element. So I'm going to say const new element equals document. And so document has something called create element on it. Okay. And we can tell it what type of element we want to create. I'm going to create a input element. And I'm going to hit enter. And you'll notice that it didn't change my HTML at all. And that's because it doesn't yet exist in my HTML. It is an element, just like any other element. It's an input element. Okay, it has all the features of an element. Query selector, I can still do stuff, but it doesn't yet exist in the DOM because I haven't injected it yet. I need to actually inject, I need to put it in. The other thing I can do with this new element is I can, well, I'll create const child. I'll create another new element, document dot, or this won't be a child, this will be the parent. So let's create a new element. Let's call it a form element. It'll be a form element. So document dot create element form. So we have a form element and we have an input element. And it would make sense if this input element were in this form element. But right now, they're just two separate elements floating around in these variables I have. They're not injected in the DOM and they're not inside. One is not inside the other. So that's the first thing we're going to do. So we're going to put this new element inside this form element. So I'm going to say form dot. Let's see. I don't do this one very often. Append. So I can append to it. Is it append child? Let's try append child. And I give it the other element that I want to append. And now if I look at my form, hey, look at that. My form has an input in it, right? So I can see that. So now I've built up a little bit more of an element. It still only exists inside my JavaScript, not yet inside my DOM. If I want to put it in my DOM, again, all elements have this append child, and they have some other ones like prepend, append, before, after. I can say document.body dot append child, and then I give it the element I want to append, or the variable containing the element I want it to append. And now it inserted it at the end of the body. So I can build up this like really complex structure. And remember, these are elements. This form is an element. So I can still add classes. It has a class list. Now this is whether or not it's been inserted or not. It has a class list with classes I can add. It has text content. It has this, it has all the same stuff. I am creating an element. I'm creating an element from nothing. And the only difference the only difference between this element and the elements that were in the DOM is this element was not in the DOM and I had to insert it. That's the only difference. But it has all the same features that any other element has. Class list, style, everything. And so I can insert it. And so this is a fine way to do it, but it can get a little bit annoying because if we want to make a complex structure with a form, with inputs and labels and this and that, it can get to be a lot of work to do all this manually, creating all these elements, appending, prepending. Again, you'll see all this in your reading. It can get really complicated to do it that way. So that's not the preferred way. For me, the preferred way is to use something called to insert adjacent HTML. So I'm going to refresh this page. Okay. And we have it, it exists on every element. So I can go grab this div, for example, const div equals document.get element by ID, electric cars. Okay, and I can do something called insert adjacent HTML. And what this does, this takes two pieces of information. The first one is where do I want to insert it relative to this div? Do I want to insert it inside this div? Do I want to insert it before this div, after this div? There's after start, after end. So let's take a quick look at this documentation. The documentation for insert adjacent HTML is actually really, really good. Okay, and this is actually also in your reading. the first argument is either before begin, after begin, before end, or after end. And it's got an excellent little visualization of the position. So if, in our case, this is our div. Okay. This is our div here. Okay. If we were to insert it before begin, it will insert a new piece of HTML here. After begin, before the content, but after the tag. Before end, right before the ending tag. After end, right after. So this allows us to inject HTML anywhere we want. And then, so that's this part, before, so let's say after begin. That's all one word. The second part here is just an addition, is just a string of HTML. So whatever we want, any HTML we want. It can be as complicated or as simple as we want. It could be elements inside of elements inside of elements with classes and this and that. You can have backticks in here, maybe with some dynamic pieces of information, class equals, right? We can inject information directly into there if we need. That's all up to us. Okay, so it can be as complex or simple as we want. Now, if I inject this, we get that piece of HTML injected right before test. Okay, this is in my opinion, this is the way that you're probably going to want to do it. You have the ability to do it either way, and both of them have this sort of ability, like the create element, append child, prepend. It also has this sort of ability where you can inject that element anywhere you want. The big difference is insert to JSON HTML is taking a string of HTML. The other one is taking an element, an actual element that we've created. And so there's a little bit of a difference there. And depending, again, on your need, you may find that you need to create an element out of something. Or maybe you want to duplicate an element. Or there's a lot of ways there's beginning to be a lot of ways that seem very similar. And for the most part, the choice that you make is really irrelevant. You do whatever you feel most comfortable with. But occasionally you will find yourself in a position where you have to use that specific tool. And you should know, you'll probably know when you're in that position. Find one, practice with one, get good at one, and try to use that one. And if you find that it's not working for you one day because of some specific scenario, then you can start digging into another. So whichever one you use, I recommend insert a JSON to HTML with a string of HTML. You can build this, right? You can concatenate a bunch of strings together to create this. And then this can be a variable. And you can insert it anywhere. All elements have this piece of information, have this method on it. So you can insert this anywhere you want. And finally, you can remove nodes, any node you want. So that this div here, remove and gone. No limit to how much you can inject. You can inject as much as you want. You can legit put a whole web page. We do that sometimes, not even joking. React, when we talk about React, that is what React is. React is a web page generated with JavaScript and then inserted right when the browser starts. So you can legitimately write an entire web page in JavaScript and inject it right into the body tag right as the page loads. It's crazy. Okay, so that's everything for today. So the way we're going to work going ahead, I'll pause. Questions? Okay. Feel free to type in any questions as I continue. Feel free to type in any questions. I've already unlocked editing the DOM. Readings for next class. This is your last set of readings for like a week and a half, and it's on events. It can be a little bit heavy, but trust me, it's pretty straightforward. There's just 2 big concepts we need to learn for tomorrow. And then we're looking at exercise 11. Exercise 11, I give you a really shitty little website that I wrote, and it's fairly simple, and it's simple. It's purposefully simple because I don't want you to get too confused with too many things. And I give you a JavaScript file. What I want you to do is I want you to do these 9 steps, okay? Change the title of the H1 and do this, okay? I want you to do it all in the JavaScript file. So that way, when the page loads, it should apply all your changes immediately, okay? And so it's going to be interesting. You're going to have to do some loops. You're going to have to modify. You're going to have to get some elements. You're going to have to set some variables. You're going to have to modify them. I think it should cover most of all the stuff that we covered today. So this should be fairly interesting. And it's fairly straightforward, I think. But of course, I'll be online. Zach will be online. Okay. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to close the Zoom meeting. We'll again start tomorrow at the same time. And for this afternoon, I'll be back, and I don't expect you to be back until, I mean, take as long as you want for lunch, but I will be available and Zach will be available from 12:45 to 3:15. Okay. So feel free. I do have this Discord channel. I noticed yesterday Discord increased the amount of participants that we can have in the Discord channel to 50. And this is a push to talk. So if you join this lab channel and you push the space bar, you can talk and everyone can hear you. Hi, Bruce. But I'm going to stop the share now, and we're going to operate in there and generally in Discord for the afternoon. If there's any feedback that you want to provide me about the lecture or anything, feel free to shoot that to me via Discord. Anything I can improve, anything that you found challenging. Obviously, if you have any questions, if there's anything that I need to tackle specifically, I'd be more than happy to obviously consider those recommendations, but also potentially modify my delivery method. Okay, so feel free, please send me some feedback. We're the first group doing this, and so all your feedback is welcome. This is your learning. Please take control of it. Tell me what you need, and I'll see if I can accommodate. Yeah, I find Zoom is a good platform too. I think it's pretty good. It's a little weird sitting here talking to no one, but I'm already excited to see people again. I thrive on social gatherings. This is going to be a really hard couple months for me. But we'll see you all on Discord in 1 hour. Okay, take care. Enjoy your lunch.